Miles Nixon solemnly swear that you will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of your ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, so help you God.
I, Richard Miles Nixon, solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, so help me God.
A couple ceiling panels removed and some drawers and a filing cabinet of it. Looks like they were planning on photographing it all from the amount of film they've got with them.
They've got some sort of recording devices too. Pretty nice by the looks of them.
And they've got recording devices.
And they've been listening in on us too. Got themselves a handy little shortwave receiver.
They're carrying a couple grand in cash, all large bills. Blocks picks, jimmies, walkie-talkies. I'd say we got some pretty experienced burglars on our hands.
10 years in the CIA and I'm still known as a common burglar.
One claims to be CIA and the others...
Retired CIA. I'm a common security consultant now.
Apologies. Retired CIA, he says. Some sort of security consultant now. Yeah? Yeah? No. Yes, sir. We're taking them down to the station. Let the captain deal with them.
Mr. Mitchell, sir, is it true that one of the burglars of the Democratic National Committee was a GOP security aide?
I assure you, any connections these men have to any of the Republican Party, including the president, are purely coincidental.
Are you implying, sir, that these connections will be in no way investigated?
Of course not. Any lead that may provide insight into these men's intentions is being thoroughly investigated.
Then does that not imply that these connections may be more than pure coincidence?
It implies that we take this event seriously and are thoroughly investigating, but not insinuating, any connections these men have to government officials.
Then you were investigating as well how $250,000 meant for the Nixon election campaign found its way to one of the burglars' bank accounts?
Yes, this occurrence is being investigated, as well as any ties that may have to the president or his party members.
Including any ties this may have to yourself?
What, may I ask, are you implying, sir?
Was there not evidence that you yourself controlled a substantial amount of money used to finance intelligence gathering about the Democratic Party? Is this burglary really a burglary, or just another one of your plots to gain information about the Democrats, allowing you to progress in Nixon's re-election campaign?
No further questions.
Attorney General John Mitchell was found guilty of funding widespread intelligence gathering operations against members of the Democratic Party, possibly including the break-ins of the Democratic National Committee at the Watergate Hotel. Mitchell was found responsible for controlling various operations of illegal spying and sabotage, performed on behalf of the Nixon re-election effort. Mitchell claims otherwise, assuring that President Nixon played no role in these crimes. Presidential aides Gordon Liddy, Howard Hunt, and James McCord, one of the Watergate burglars, were convicted as well of conspiracy and burglary, as well as wiretapping on behalf of the Nixon re-election campaign. These men are believed to be co-conspirators with Mitchell, though proof does not yet exist that these men were not acting independently. The case of the Watergate Seven, as Liddy, Hunt, and McCord, along with the other four burglars, Bernard Barker, Virgilio Gonzalez, Eugenio Martinez, and Frank Sturgis, have now become known as, is to begin May 18th.
An embarrassment. Mitchell knew what would happen if he got caught, and now he'll suffer the consequences.
You did not, though. You won the re-election, so his efforts were apparently successful.
Successful? You think making a fool out of himself publicly, and through that making a fool out of me, is a success? Half the country believes me to be a criminal, thinks I bugged the entire government, Democratic or no, just to win the election.
And did you?
I'm Lil Wayne, and I'm promoting my new album, I Am Not an Artist, featuring the hit singles, No Worries, I'm a terrible rapper, these lyrics suck, I can't remember all of them, but they all pretty awful, because I'm Lil Wayne, and I'm not an artist.
President Nixon, did you not claim that the White House counsel, John Dean, conducted an investigation of the Watergate break-in, in which you say he claimed that no one from the White House was involved?
I did.
But it was not proven that former Attorney General John Mitchell, head of your re-election campaign, played a significant role in a mass collection of spying operations against members of the Democratic Party.
I believe he was.
Then can it be concluded that the results of Dean's investigation are not to be relied upon as correct?
If that is the conclusion that you wish to draw,
Is it not the conclusion that you drew as well? Or did you not relieve Mr. Dean of his service to you?
Mr. Dean was removed from his position.
So you agreed that his investigation was invalid, thus conducting that there was still a possibility that the members of the White House were involved in this event?
It is a possibility, though I strongly doubt that there is a necessity for suspicion of members of the White House,
Including yourself?
including myself.
So you still claim no connections to any of the events in the Watergate break-in?
Yes.
Mr. McCord, did you in March of 1973 write a letter addressed to Judge John Sirka?
I did.
And in this letter, you wrote the following in addressing Judge Sirka. I will state the following to you at this time, which I hope may be of help to you in meeting our justice in this case. 1. There was political pressure applied to the defendants to plead guilty and remain silent. 2. Perjury occurred during the trial in matters highly material to the very structure, orientation, and impact of the government's case, and to the motivation and intent of the defendants. 3. Others involved in the Watergate Scandal operation were not identified during the trial when they could have been by those testifying. 4. The Watergate operation was not a CIA operation. The Cubans may have been misled by others into believing that it was a CIA operation. I know for a fact that it was not. 5. Some statements were unfortunately made by a witness which left the court with the impression that he was stating untruths or withholding facts of his knowledge when in fact only honest errors of memory were involved. 6. My motivations were different than those of others involved, but were not limited to or simply those offered in my defense during the trial. This is no fault of my attorneys, but of the circumstances under which we had to prepare my defense. Did you truthfully state these claims, Mr. McCord?
I did.
To address the first of these statements, Mr. McCord, in what way was political pressure applied to the defendants? Were they pressured by certain political figures?
Yes, both John Dean, counsel to the President, and Attorney General John Mitchell pressured these men into pleading guilty.
And is it on the sole fact which you claimed the perjury of these men?
No, as I stated in my letter, they neglected to identify other members of the Watergate operation.
An operation which you claim to not have been prompted by the Central Intelligence Agency, despite the belief of other members of the conspiracy?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor. Mr. Dean, were you not employed by the President of the United States to investigate the events which occurred in the Watergate Hotel on June 17, 1972?
Yes.
And what did you conclude from your investigation?
That no members of the White House were involved.
And is that the conclusion that you informed the President of?
Yes.
But this fact was later proved incorrect. Mr. Dean, are you aware that one of the burglars, Mr. McCord, has accused you of pressuring other members of the Watergate 7 to plead guilty?
I am aware.
And do you admit to this fact?
I admit that I did advise, not pressure, these men to plead guilty, because they were, in fact, guilty.
But Mr. McCord believes otherwise. Is it not true that you advised these men to plead guilty for the reason other than their actual guilt? Were you not, in fact, motivated to advise them for other reasons?
I was motivated for other reasons as well.
And what were these reasons, Mr. Dean?
By pleading guilty, these men were allowed to remain fairly silent.
Mr. Dean, were you not relieved of your service to the President recently?
I was.
Mr. Dean, by remaining silent, did you believe these men would avoid putting the blame on the President?
I did.
So you admit that you believed the President to have played a role in these events?
Yes.
And it was the President who advised you to advise these men not to put blame on him?
It was.
So you admit that the President attempted to cover up his role that occurred in the Watergate Hotel events?
Yes, we discussed the cover-up on many occasions.
Many? This was a topic often discussed by the President?
Yes, I can recall discussing it with him on at least 35 occasions.
Mr. Butterfield, what was your position while working for the President?
I was the Secretary of Presidential Appointments.
But you're no longer at that post?
No, I am not.
Mr. Butterfield, do you believe that President Nixon was responsible for the attempts to tap the Democratic National Committee at the Watergate Hotel?
I do not know whether the President is responsible for these events.
But do you believe the president guilty of other similar circumstances?
I'm aware that since 1971, President Nixon has secretly recorded all conversations and telephone calls in his office.
No further questions for Mr. Butterfield, Your Honor. If I may call President Nixon to the stand. Mr. President, is it true that you have bugged your own offices since 1971, as Mr. Butterfield has claimed?
I have had recording devices placed in my offices since that time. Yes. However, these devices have since been disconnected.
Mr. President, can you present the recordings from your offices to the court?
I will not. Those tapes contain conversations unrelated to this case and some with information that is national security. Information not meant to the general public.
Mr. President, are you aware that you are withholding information that is relevant to this case, which may be seen as an obstruction of justice?
I will not hand over those tapes.
On Saturday night, President Nixon fired Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox, placing Leon Jaworski in the position in his stead. Attorney General Richardson and Deputy Attorney General William D. Ruckelshaw resigned as well after refusing to refire Cox on Nixon's orders. Pressure on Congress has led to consideration of impeachment of the president. The president himself has made little comment on this fact, except in his declaration that, "I am not a crook." However, this may be hard to believe by many due to the necessity of subpoena in order to gather tape recordings of conversation that Nixon refused to hand over, despite their relevance to the Watergate case.
Impeachment? They want to impeach me over a few recordings which I have withheld to protect the public?
You can't withhold them any longer. The court ordered you hand them over.
And I have! I gave them thousands of pages and transcripts.
Transcripts? You think that will appease them? They'll want the tapes.
They already do. The House Judiciary Committee has demanded that I hand them over. The Supreme Court has ruled the same.
I spilled liquids all over the table. I spilled liquids all over the floor. I have a revolutionary project called the Sham Woohoo. Woohoo! Not the Sham Woohoo, the Sham Woohoo! Let's say it like that. You see, with an ordinary dish towel, you just wipe it up. But with the Sham Woohoo, you can just push it off the table.
Mr. Haig, what explanation can you give for the nearly 20-minute gap in one of the White House recordings?
I'm afraid there was no explanation for the gap. It must have been the work of some sinister force that erased the segment.
So you claim that the president played no part in removing the piece, or do you mean to imply that the president is the sinister force?
President Nixon played no part in the presence of the gap in the tape.
Mr. President, you were meant to hand in the White House recordings, yet you turned in 1,200 pages of edited transcript.
I have since turned in the tapes. The court has received recordings of 64 White House conversations, despite my right of executive privilege.
You were then aware that in these tapes we found a conversation held 3 days after the Watergate break-in, in which you ordered members of the FBI to cover up your involvement by abandoning the investigation. Is this not true?
It is true.
So then you admit to knowing the involvement of members in your re-election committee and officials in the White House?
Yes.
Yesterday, President Richard Nixon officially resigned from his position. The House Judiciary Committee adopted the first, second, and third articles of impeachment, charging Nixon with obstruction of justice, misuse of power, violation of his oath of office, and failure to comply with the House subpoenas, which demanded the White House recordings that proved Nixon's involvement in the Watergate cover-up to be handed over. Nixon's resignation was the result instead of his otherwise inevitable impeachment.
First president to resign? That's what you'll be remembered for.
Better than the second president to be impeached. Always better to be first, not second. Just be sure they remember you for something better.